to Drinking Bros, presented by GhostBed.com.
Welcome to Drinkin' Bros. Kids, we're split up around the nation as we prepare our descent on Las Vegas. We're doing a lot of shows over the course of the next week in Vegas. Some say we're there too long, so Dan is out of town getting prepared for that, and I will join him tomorrow night. Meanwhile, who do we have on the show today, D'Anthony?
Today we've got Peter Boghossian, who you can follow on Twitter. He's got a lot of good stuff there. He's also got a new book out called How to Have Impossible Conversations, a Practical Guide. And we were talking about it right before we went live here. He made the point, and I make a similar point all the time, so I'm going to bring it up now. He made the point that somebody who is bullshitting you to spare your feelings doesn't actually give a shit about you. In fact, they don't respect you at all. Being frank with somebody and telling them the truth seems a lot more respectful than feeding people bullshit, right?
Correct. And so first, thanks for having me on. And I want to drill down on that for a second, because I think it's so important. I think what we talked about at the beginning is that I want you to go hard on me at this interview, and I want to go hard, push back on you. And that's really important, that we have an honest conversation. And not only does that not mean that I dislike you guys, if anything, it means that then we have a possibility to have a real friendship and a real conversation, because no one's bullshitting anybody.
Yeah, well, I'll start off first. I fucking hate that glass thing behind you, dude. What is that? I'm joking.
Okay, so we had to convert. So I have no more office anymore because of COVID, and so we had to convert spaces in the home to just have conversations or just whatever. So just it is what it is. I have no other backdrop here.
I'm totally kidding. I didn't know if you were super religious. I was like, man, are we interrupting him? I know you've been on a 48-hour fast, and I was like, is that part of your religion?
I'm the opposite of super religious.
Yeah. Why are you fasting, by the way, for 48 hours? We briefly talked about it before we went online here. What's the purpose behind that? You look like a fit guy.
I used to do purple belt in jiu-jitsu, and I used to do jiu-jitsu, very regularly until the pandemic hit, and then I haven't done it over a year. That made me feel good that you said that, because I'm about to go to the gym after this, and it's been a tough pandemic. But I have Crohn's disease as well, and I've been intermittent fasting it's an autoimmune disorder of the gut, and I've been intermittent fasting for about 5 years when I found out that I had high cholesterol and was pre-diabetic, and it was just great. I love it, and there seems to be a convergence of data now, independent analysis about the benefits of intermittent fasting. And I've also been reading, so one of the things that we do is we kind of trick ourselves into thinking, it's not really that good for me. Like, if we don't want to do something, we'll say, well, it can't be that good. But there is evidence now that fasting is good. So I've been on a 48-hour fast. So once a week, I'm going to try to fast for 48 hours. I think it's good, particularly with my condition of Crohn's disease. And I know that when I intermittent fast, I feel much better. So we'll see how it works out.
It's interesting you frame it as, and that we collectively frame it as intermittent fasting, because up until maybe 10,000 years ago, that was just the standard. You would eat one large meal every day or two. And now we consider like the 3 meals a day to be normal. And then a lot of people particularly in the fitness community over the last 10 or 15 years have pushed the idea of like 5 small meals per day. But when have we ever eaten like that? You know what I mean? In human evolution.
And I think the 5 small meals a day comes from, if you look at what professional bodybuilders do with protein ratios, and that's to maintain muscle mass. But that was one of the primary movements of paleo. And if you read Rob Wolf's book, et cetera, and they talk about that. But the way I think to approach this is the same way you would approach virtually anything else in your life, is you do a pre-test, and then you do the intervention, and you do a post-test. So the pre-test is you just get your blood work, what's your A1Cs, what's your cholesterol, then you try to keep all those variables the same, and then you test it 3 months later, and you see how it goes. Right. But that thinking, we didn't evolve to think like that, right? That's a kind of thing that we have to impose upon ourselves, and that's one of the things that prevents us from fooling ourselves, right? Because we want to fool ourselves. We want to say, well, the ice cream is not that bad for us, or we don't really need to fast, or one thing won't hurt me, but it's just a way to fool yourself. So science keeps our beliefs and our delusions in check.
Yeah,
you've got right?
Yeah, you've got a Crohn's brother here. I want to point out, he raised his fist in the air in solidarity with you. You got a Crohn's brother here on this side. Our producer, actually, Delco Dan, has got Crohn's disease. So he was amped that you had, like, you guys are going through the same struggles.
Amped that I had it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had it since I was 13. It's pretty much, I wouldn't say that it's ruined my life, but it's because I've tried to not let it interfere with, like my jujitsu and stuff. But I've definitely, if anybody wants to talk about this, I mean, we could talk about this. I don't know how interesting it is to people, but basically you have to take care, you have to be extra vigilant in taking care of yourself. And then you have this suite of other problems. Like I have sleep apnea because of the Crohn's disease. I have all this extra shit because of the Crohn's disease. But it's just like anything else, we're all randomly doled out illnesses, et cetera, and how we deal with them is the important thing, and how we learn from them and move on.
Yeah, no, I agree. And your book, by the way, Jesus Christ, man, the ratings and reviews on this thing is through the roof. Are you shocked at the response you've gotten from this?
For a second, would you say?
Are you shocked? I'm looking at the ratings and reviews for your books right now for this book, How to Have an Impossible Conversation, A Practical Guide. This is a hit. Like, are you shocked at the response by this, or is this a book that somebody's been waiting for due to our current political climate? Seem to have lost Peter there at the Vatican.
Thanks. I heard. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Gary. There you go.
Vatican.
There you go. There you go.
Did I get back to signal? Well, first of all, I think something to think about when anybody wants to engage in a type of work. Give me a thumbs up if you hear me. Thumbs up if you hear me.
Yep, I'm getting about every third word. I think you're good now.
I think.
I'd say sign back out and sign back in, and then we'll keep going live on air here, and I'll talk about all the things I've eaten today since you've been fasting for 48 hours. Definitely want to start off with that dumpling soup I had last night. That was delightful.
I might be back.
Yeah, that sounds good.
There you go.
Oh, he left.
Yeah. Well, he's gone.
Anyway, so before he gets back, and I'm going to ask him about this when he comes back, but that whole what he's describing is cognitive dissonance, where we're not honest with ourselves as human beings, and then the other part of that is something that he personally talks and writes about a lot, and something that he talks about a lot in his book, which is the Socratic Method. It's basic scientific rigor, right? Like if your ideas don't stand up to a test of some sort, then they're not real. It's just bullshit.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I mean, dude,
that's back.
There we go. There.
Yeah, I was just saying, Peter. I was just saying the two things you're describing before we got off full blown Crohn's. There was one, we have this severe level of cognitive dissonance, which I imagine is some kind of psychological barrier. You know what I mean? To protect us from thoughts that are too difficult or something. And the other one is that Socratic method that you talk and write about a lot. It's if you have an idea, you create a test for it, then you test it, and you make a new idea out of the results of that test and keep it moving. That's what science is, and we've completely lost that.
Correct. So we've got a lot of things to unpack there. The Socratic method is basically, I would argue that David Deutsch argues something like this in his book, is that if any creatures were to, it just cracks me up that you're getting stoned on the air. I think that's hilarious.
Oh, every show.
There we go.
Good for you. So I think you're going to like this thought then.
Okay.
If any creatures existed anywhere in the world, anywhere in the universe, they would have to use some version of the Socratic method. Like that's the universal constant for how people would come to knowledge and communicate. They'd challenge each other's ideas. They'd question, they'd try to falsify or show their ideas are false. We've fallen into a trap right now, a little pit, when the ideology of the current age in which we're living is amplified by social media and by the university system, which is our echo chambers. We've fallen a little trap in which truth seems to be undervalued at this particular time.
Well, with truth being undervalued at this particular time, don't you think a lot of that has to do with the media itself? Because I feel like that's where it's starting, and then everybody else is responding off of what they're either hearing and or reading in the news. And I think it starts at the top and trickles down.
I think that's definitely part of it. I think another
that.
part. Okay, go ahead. Yeah, you go ahead. I've got a second part to that.
No,
I want you to
no,
get your
you go.
thoughts on. Okay, so
you go, then
I think the second part of I think the media proliferation is makes it exponential, but I think the idea that people casually use the phrase "speak my truth" now is a problem, because there's truth and then there's not truth. There's not my truth versus yours. But me feeling a certain way doesn't make that accurate. Now, my feelings are what they are. They are happening, and there's no question about that. However, that doesn't necessarily justify how I feel, right?
Right. So I'm really glad you said that. And what happened right there in that interaction when we both spoke at the same time, and then I said, "You go," that's a really useful thing that you can use. And it's not like a, you know, technique or anything, but it's just a way to show people that you're listening to them. And so I want to push back on what you said. I don't think it starts in the media. I think the problem is that it starts in the university, and we've indoctrinated an entire generation of people who then go into the media. So they occupy positions in the media and they take these deranged ideas with them. And this idea that Dan was talking about of it's called lived experience, your lived truth. We've taught people that, and it's a denigration of truth overall. So we tell people that their lived experience is privileged over, for example, intermittent fasting, to bring it back to that. My lived experience of intermittent fasting is completely fucking irrelevant. The only thing that's relevant are what do the numbers show. And if the numbers show that my cholesterol has gone through the roof as a result of this, and my A1Cs, for example, have gone through the roof, then what difference does my lived experience make if the activity in which I'm engaging is killing me? So I don't think it's the media. I think it's the university system has indoctrinated people, and we've veered away from certain fundamental principles of a free civil society.
How do we get back then to our roots and to who we used to be, or has it always been like this?
It's always been like this to a certain degree, but now we have problems we have entire systems that have hijacked our thoughts, particularly about race, gender, and sexual orientation, so that we have to think something. We have certain values that have popped up almost literally overnight in the last 2 years. For example, equity would be a great example. If you ask people even a few years ago what equity meant, they'd give a kind of a financial explanation. You know, if you have so much money invested in a house, what have you, have equity in your house. But now equity has been the North Star of our K-12 institutions, of increasingly in business and media. So what's happening is that the mission statement of these institutions is the same, but the people occupying them discharge those mission statements in different ways. That's why the ACLU, for example, is gone woke. The SPLC has gone woke. We have all these organizations that have gone woke. So it's like invasion of the body snatchers. They look the same from the outside. Their mission statement is the same, but they're doing totally different things. They're not the same organizations they were even 5 years ago.
Yeah, I don't think it's too much different than people like Deepak Chopra, for example, talking about quantum entanglement and trying to make it sound mystical and stuff, just to justify his own lunatic beliefs. It's basically like you're just co-opting language and trying to recreate a reality that never existed in the first place.
Yes.
It's so bizarre.
Right. In part, that's correct. I'm going to try to keep to the what we talked about in the beginning of pushing back on each other. So I'm going to push back. So the philosopher Daniel Dennett calls that a deepity. It's something that sounds profound, but it's not. The difference between Chopra and what we see now is Chopra's a lone individual spouting total nonsense. But the university systems, you have the imprimatur, or the stamp of, rigor, or the stamp of the academy, and then they're producing completely deranged ideas. So there's a difference between an individual going out there talking about quantum, whatever it is, entanglement, what have you, and then a university system pumping out stuff that's just demonstrably false.
Right. That's a really good point. Yeah. I mean, I guess you would call that systemic at this point. And I don't know, do you think there's any chance that that's the reason that less people are going to college now than before? Maybe it's the loan debt. Maybe it's just the economy shifting to more of a service economy or something like that. It's hard to say exactly what it might be, but I do think a lot of people in mid-America especially are turned off by the idea of sending their children places where they're going to get inundated with these ideas. I mean, The Coddling of the American Mind is a really good book. I talk about it all the time on the show.
Wonderful
And
book.
the way they describe how universities in America now are teaching kids all the tenets of PTSD, like cognitive, that you reverse with cognitive behavioral therapy, like catastrophizing and emotional reasoning and all this stuff. Like, it's literally being taught now. And I don't understand.
You're right. We've damaged the cognitions and emotions. We've made people brittle. But what we've done even beyond that is we've betrayed the confidence of people, right? So people don't trust it's like the 90s, the media in the 90s as it was falling apart, traditional media. Now we have the colleges and universities falling apart because there's a legitimacy crisis. There's a crisis of legitimacy. If you look at the data, and The Coddling of the American Mind is a fantastic book. And that's why, so first, if you look at the data, increasingly professors, et cetera, are liberal, and administrators as well. And they're not just liberal in terms of the sense that I'm liberal. I don't know what you guys' political orientation are, but they're becoming increasingly woke. So this podcast right here, the Drinking Bros, we need these types of podcasts and Rogan and these kinds of conversations because kids are not getting in the university. In fact, they're getting just the opposite. So they're coming to you to listen to people drop truth bombs and to challenge their ideas. And I would add one more thing to that. That's why in this conversation, it's so important that you and I push back on each other and we show people that you can have disagreements with someone and they can be civil, and we can go out and drink it afterward and have a good time and be friends. In fact, our friendship will be deeper if neither one of us are bullshitting the other one.
Yeah, that's why I almost spit out my drink when you said that. Because you were like, oh, hey, I don't know if you guys are liberal or conservative. No, I'm not. Furthest thing from liberal. But the problem is, like you were saying, at the university level, professors and kids and all that other stuff, kids is a tough one. And I'll tell you why. You go in hopeful. You don't really know that much about the world. And then you're in college. And while you're there, you're like, oh, man, I can make a difference. I can get my degree and whatever I think I'm going to get it in. I can go out into the real world and I can actually make a difference. Then most of the time you get out into the real world and you're like, shit, I really can make a difference here. Then you start to care about other things, kids, taxes, property taxes, how much your house costs and everything else. And you're like, shit. Those liberal values aren't really that great anymore. I care about finances and shit like that. And then a lot of people, a lot of kids who go to college end up switching towards, conservative later in life as opposed to earlier in life. So how do you start it at a university level then, I guess, and get rid of more liberal professors? Because you are right. Look, most of my professors were liberal.
I think the whole system needs to be defunded. All of it.
College included.
For a number of reasons, right? I mean, it's not just a predatory.
It's completely corrupt.
Yeah, I mean the way that
it's completely corrupt. You've sold people a lie. But if I may, I want to push back on, or I want to comment on. So what does it mean to you when you say I'm a conservative? Like what does that mean?
Conservative, just based on how it's defined as far as fiscally, immigration wise, tax laws, what I believe in. I lean
small government and national sovereignty.
Correct. Like 2A,
so
freedom of speech. Like those are more important to me than climate change.
Okay, I got it.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Let's say that we itemized your beliefs,
Mhm.
and we started with those beliefs in which you had the greatest confidence. And you said itemized. It's usually when you're in a fight, the first thing someone throws is the thing they're best at. So when you said immigration. So you probably have the highest confidence, your beliefs about that. Do you think society would be better off or worse off if you had a university, if our university systems were staffed with conservatives, that is people who had similar beliefs that you do and teach kids those beliefs?
No. And I'll tell you why. My answer is no to that, because then you're not learning about either side. You're just hearing one side, which is what is going on today. However, you obviously can't go in as a professor and go into an interview and they ask you what your political beliefs are. And you're like, all right, great. We're going to go 50-50 on this and try to figure it out. Okay. And that way the kids are getting the best educations.
All right. So this is extremely important. So the view that you just articulated so you're a conservative, and even if conservatives gain power, you're saying, and I don't want to put words in, I just want to make sure you're saying that what you want is a diversity of thought in the academy, so that people are taught by liberals, conservatives, Marxists, libertarians, everybody in the whole mix, Friedmanites. That attitude right there has become a conservative value, but it is an absolute toxin to the people currently in the universities.
Yeah. It's wild, man. I was listening to Russell Brand on his Instagram the other day, and he goes, 10 years ago, pretty much everybody on the planet would have painted me as a far left, like liberal as can possibly be. And now I find myself more consistently every day agreeing with the positions of people that are so-called conservatives in society now. And I don't understand why, because my opinions haven't changed.
Right. I can tell you exactly why that is. And that's why I keep seeing Tetherball Academy. Tell me your name again.
Ross Patterson. The name of the company is Tetherball Academy Media. So we own about 15, 16 podcasts, and there is equally diverse. We've got two history shows, politics shows, entertainment, sports, all of it.
All right. So Ross, when you say that you're a conservative, the values that you hold, so I'm not sure those, in fact, I don't think those are useful labels, conservatives or liberals anymore. My friend Dave Rubin keeps constantly talking about, he's been talking about for years, I didn't leave the left left me. So just take one simple example. I'm 54, almost 55 this month, July 25th. Let's take a simple example. If you went back and if you don't believe me, just ask your parents. Ask your parents, you say, hey, do you think 10 years ago, if we asked people, if we started plucking people off the street and said, hey, at some time in the future, there's going to be people who are rioting in the streets. Maybe their cause is justified, maybe it isn't, but they're going to be destroying buildings, they're going to be hurting other people, etc. Do you think that they should be arrested? They're going to look at you like you're insane. Like, of course they should be arrested. But now the idea that they should be arrested is a conservative belief. But it's not a conservative belief. It's only become a conservative belief.
No, I agree.
Yeah, it's bizarre.
It is. Yeah. Look, it's completely bizarre. But
I would also argue. No, go ahead. Sorry.
When I look at it, I don't know how we get back to that place though of, let's say, 10 years ago, because in my opinion, and this is coming from Hollywood, making movies and all that other shit for many years. I'm a comedian. Comedy and the voice of comedy and jokes, just the tone of jokes has changed in scripts and books and writing and everything else. Shit, I did a book. I wrote a book about one of my best friends, his biography, and it had to go to the Department of Defense. Well, it's got stuck there for 18 months. Within that 18 months, the Me Too movement happened. There was riots and some other things happened. When we got that draft back of the book from the Department of Defense, the publisher, who was Penguin, said, look, you've got to go in and change. And they had a laundry list of notes that weren't in the original draft that we sent to the Department of Defense a year and a half earlier. That's how quickly it has changed of
radical
jokes.
Radical transformation.
Yes. Yeah. So I don't know
so
how we get back there.
I don't think we're even remotely close to talking about how we get back to it until my opinion anyway, until we've fleshed out the severity, depth, and nature of the problem. This is an ideology which has captured all of our institutions within 18 months. And so in the same way, even think of the defense mechanism that the ideology needs, right? It needs to create a barrier that insulates itself to keep it parasitizing our institutions. And part of that barrier is, if you question it, well, why should we have equity in the schools? Racist, Nazi, bigot, transphobe, homophobe, right? All of these things are meant to keep the ideology in place.
So I agree with you. I think we're in. I guess I would call it like the social economy, as it were. Like what statements and positions are worth what to whom. And right now, it seems like, and I don't understand it. I mean, I know a lot of people on a lot of sides of the political spectrum. I agree with Ruben. We've had Ruben on the show. Actually, he's a great dude.
Yeah.
That
good friend of mine.
This binary political shit. That's tribalism, man. There's no place for that shit.
Right.
What's the point? What are the chances that a party or the other has 12 bullet points and I just agree with all of them? right? It doesn't make any sense. So why would that be the case? Why would one umbrella of a political faction encapsulate all of my beliefs as a human being?
Right. So
I just
maybe
don't.
that's it. Maybe so that's right. So maybe the jumping off point to Ross is one of the things we do about it is reward people who go against the tribe, right? We reward people who flip flop, which is an inherently negative word. You change your mind based upon evidence. You revise your belief. Like that should be core to all of us. And I think the other thing is, if you don't have friends who have different beliefs than you do, you need a new set of friends. Like you got to find different people. It's really important. And I think that and again, I don't know, this is so bizarre to me. This is one of the things that people keep calling me a conservative because I don't self-identify that way, but that I believe that we need intellectual diversity. You have to hear the other side of the argument. You have to be willing to be offended, right? Because if you're not willing, if you go through your whole college or your whole life and you're never offended, man, you're never thinking about anything. And then you're offended, to paraphrase Stephen Fry. So fucking what? Who gives a shit? I can possibly care less if someone's offended. Now, if you offend them on the basis of attacking an immutable characteristic, like something they can't change, well, that's a different thing. But no idea should be sacred, right? People deserve dignity. Ideas don't deserve dignity. Ideas deserve to be treated with ruthlessly. And people who treat ideas ruthlessly, I would argue, will make far better friends. Because as we started talking about, you're not being nice to somebody you're certainly not being kind to somebody when you don't challenge their ideas, when you let them get away with bullshit. You're letting them dig their way down into delusion. And they're not being authentic friends to you either.
But too many people today are afraid of confrontation. And some of them either don't want to have the tough talks. Some of them don't want to hear the tough talks. And as far as identifying, like you were saying, as a conservative, I feel like you're almost forced to pick one before you go into a conversation these days. Otherwise,
and how tragic is it?
Oh, it is. It is
aren't willing to offend or aren't. So think about how crazy it is. Aristotle says that the highest form of friendship is between two virtuous people. And if you're not saying what you believe and you don't know if somebody else is saying what they believe, there's no conversation there, right? So you're denying. So we are literally living in a generation in which we're not allowed to develop deep, profound, and authentic friendships because we're so fucking worried about offending everybody.
Yeah, imagine that in the sports world. I mean, if you map it onto one of our, I guess you could say, recreational tribalist events that we go through as human beings, I seriously doubt there's anybody out there that's a sports fan that only has friends who are fans of the same teams as them. They probably have a diverse group of sports fan friends who they talk shit to all the time. That's what I do. That's what Ross and I, even amongst our fans on the sports show, we light those guys up all the time, and they light us up anytime our teams lose. That is a normal thing. So how have we not mapped that on to society? Because clearly it works. I mean,
yeah,
I'm sure people. Go ahead.
I'll take a jumping off point from that if you guys don't mind. I'll dive into change the area a little bit. Why is there no diversity on professional sports teams? Why isn't that? Go ahead.
Well, I can answer that for you. Look, the best athletes are going to make the team. They are not often white. I don't see me personally as a white man. I don't see a problem with it. However, I see a problem when they want to diversify other areas, such as what's happening at ESPN today. And when somebody is calling it out for it, like Rachel Nichols, I have a problem with that.
Hold on. So the reason there's no diversity in professional sports teams is because they want to win.
It's a meritocracy. That's why.
It's a pure meritocracy.
Yeah.
That's the reason, for example, there are no midgets on professional basketball teams, right? Because they want to win. So
that's pretty dope, though. If you could just instead of throwing the ball around, you could toss the midget, then hold him up there, and he could dunk.
Well, I was thinking my original idea for that was, what if every team had one midget and they're so low to the ground that nobody else could get the ball? But that's another story. But I guess the larger point that I wanted to make is that when you veer away from your telos, your end, your goal, anytime you add an additional constraint, it makes it less likely that you're going to achieve what you want to achieve.
Well, now that's a very conservative viewpoint too, if you apply it to the economy, and that's how conservatives feel about government regulation and interference, right? Would you say that that's similar?
I think it is. I think it is to an extent. and then you could talk about whether or not what I'm going to say now is a conservative point of view. I don't think it is. I think it's an American point of view.
Right.
But the idea that we have to level the playing field to give everybody the opportunity, for example, to succeed. In other words, we need a public education of the first rate, whether you're black, white, Jewish, midget, it doesn't matter what it is. Like, we have to create conditions that allow people to succeed. I don't think that's conservative or liberal. I think that's just being a decent American, and that's what it means to care about your fellow. And it also, a rising tide lifts all boats.
Correct.
But what we have now is we're kind of captured. We're living in ideological capture, where a small fringe group of people, mostly on the left, who dominate the educational institutions, are setting the moral agenda for us. Ross, are you reading comments?
No, yeah, I'm actually responding to a couple people here who were they love when you use the term midget a lot, and they're wondering if it's some sort of fetish, or perhaps you've been with one in the past. And we don't kink shame here, never have, never will. But I'm letting them know, hey, I will definitely ask him about the midgets for sure.
No, you can ask me anything you want. No, I've never been with a midget before,
really,
sexually.
Okay.
No, I had a friend when I was in New York City. He was, I was friendly with a guy who was making mad money. I lived in the Lower East Side, East 5th between A and B when I was in graduate school. And there's a guy who lived around there who was tossed, and he was telling me how much we used to go to this bar together. And he was telling me how much money he used to make. He used to buy me drinks all the time. But no, I've never been with a midget sexually.
Okay, great. And I think that's
now that
important.
We've cleared that up.
Because you said at the top, look, it's okay to have tough conversations. That's a tough one to have. If you or a loved one out there has either been with a midget or hasn't, ask them. It'll probably tell you who they are as a person. How tall is your wife?
My wife, she's about 5'7", 5'8".
All right.
I'm about 5'9", 5'10", a little shorter than 5'10".
Okay, so nine more inches less, and then she'd be the legal maximum height for a midget, which is 4'11".
Yeah, and that's the other thing. I think that's right. There should be no kink shaming. It should be sex positive. Anybody should be able to be with a guy, or as long as the person with whom you're with can consent. And I do think that there is also, to bring it back to this is like really creepy shit that happens. It's always like anytime anybody speaks against the orthodoxy, like a friend of mine is happening now at Princeton to him. Have you ever noticed that anytime people speak about this, there's always a sexual accusation?
Oh yeah.
Invariably, it won't be like, he cheated on his taxes or whatever. It'll always be, he did something sexually inappropriate, because that's the kind of creepy shit that these people go to.
Yeah, and again, how do we get out of this? That's my biggest question, because look, we're on 5 days a week, sometimes multiple shows, Dan and I, and it always comes back to that, like, because I'll get on Dan for this as well. Well, I'll say this to him over and over and over again. I said, look, what you're saying is correct. That is the correct way to think about our country, what we should do as a nation, what we should do as a neighbor, or whatever it is. But I don't think it's going to happen. I think we've gone too far past it. How do we get back to that point?
Okay.
Yeah, you mentioned incentivizing that kind of behavior before. How do you incentivize that when all of the social capital that exists is controlled and distributed by one side of this conversation? That's what I want to know.
All right. So let's bracket that. We'll come back to it. Let's talk. So I'm going to lay out a plan for what I think we should do. This is going to be very unsexy, but I'm going to say it anyway. The first order of business is to show up. Show the fuck up. So when you watch Benjamin Boyce's videos, for example, about the equity resolutions in Washington State, there were only like 5 people who were there. And all of these people are woke maniacs. So we have to start showing up. You have to show up at PTA. And again, no one wants to hear this message, but you wanted to know what we want to do. And I'm just being honest with you.
Yeah.
You have to show the fuck up, right? And not just show up, but record it. Hold people accountable. Make the process transparent. So go to these meetings. Don't take nonsense, because again, it's the hardcore activists to go, woke activists to go. So the first order of business is to show the fuck up. You want to talk about that, or you want me to keep running through the list?
No, look, I had Tim Grover on a couple weeks ago. Brilliant man, works with Jordan Kobe and all that other shit. He says showing up should be part of it. So he hates to hear the word showing up. He goes, look, anybody who tells you to show up, that should be your fucking job in the first place.
Correct. Absolutely, 100%.
Like, that shouldn't even need to be said.
Ross, you're talking about how fucked we are right now. I mean, maybe whenever you're having issues as a musician or an athlete, or if you're studying math or anything, if you're having issues or things are getting too complicated or you're losing focus, what's the phrase everybody always uses? Get back to the basics, right? Get back to the fundamentals. Yep. And maybe that's what he's saying here. Maybe we need to get people back into the habit of just showing the fuck up, because it's become something that clearly isn't just expected of everyone at this point.
But if I look at today's society and what we were talking about earlier with the riots and everything else, right? They clearly showed up. Now, whether or not we like their actions is a different fucking story, but they did show up and show out for long, long periods of time. And shit, if you look at what's going on in Portland, they're still showing up every single day. The media isn't reporting it, but they're burning down the goddamn buildings there, and they are showing up every single day.
Yep, they're committed.
So how do we defeat that when nobody's reporting it, so nobody wants to talk about it? I guess that would probably be the next step.
So that's another question, because the systemic dysfunction in Portland by the mayor, Ted Wheeler, who's a living disgrace, that is another conversation that we can have entirely. And just parenthetically, one of the things that I've learned in the last year or year and a half is the importance of local governance. I just took it for granted. Like, I just took it for granted that the DA would prosecute people and the police would. We had 2 cars stolen in front of our home just very, very recently. And they found one of the cars right out in front of the street here.
Yeah, where do you live at? What city do you live in?
Portland.
Oh, Portland. You live in Portland right now?
Yeah, it's
shit.
Ted Wheeler had to move out of his condo downtown. Remember that? Because they came and firebombed the goddamn thing?
But where did he move? He moved to his $1.3 million mansion in the Northwest, right? He doesn't give a shit about ordinary working class people.
No, of course not.
No, he's a disgrace.
No, of course not. And
so they found these. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it should be impossible to become rich being a public servant. That should be illegal.
No, he
somehow.
He comes from family money.
Right, but Nancy Pelosi doesn't, for example, right? Like, Pelosi started out as a civil service, so did Feinstein. Now they're worth, dozens of millions at least a piece. And it's not just liberal people either. I mean, politics is fucked in this country.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I support term limits.
Congressional and senatorial term limits for sure. I agree with that. Or just defund politicians altogether. So you're talking about all the violence and stuff, and you know a lot of the stuff you're talking about now in this book you have out is about having tough conversations.
Right.
I have a hard time. Like, at some point the mind rebels at some of this shit, and I have a hard time contextualizing how billions of dollars worth of property damage done to private and federal and local government buildings over the course of the summer somehow is not an assault on democracy, and 300 dumb hillbillies taking selfies in the fucking Capitol building are. Like, if maybe they're both.
Can I suggest why you have a hard time with that?
Yes. Yeah, I'd love to hear that.
Because you're sane.
Yeah. But it costs you something to say that out loud. It costs you something to say insurrection. It was 300 hillbillies taking selfies. There's a social price to pay for that.
Yeah. So this is the thing that I would love to talk about and linger on this when Ross said, what is the solution? You have to be willing. There's Greeks have a word for it, speaking truth in the face of danger, parrhesia. You have to be willing to speak up. You have to be willing to take a social hit. And do you really give a shit if 5,000 people come out on Twitter and tell you, no, one of the most important things that you need to differentiate is whose voice doesn't matter. And the vast majority of people's voices don't matter. Now, if somebody you respect tells you that, then that's different. Then you have to. But right now, we have a system in which if you don't speak up, if you don't say, listen, this is wrong, this is hurting people, and the whole idea of having a conversation about that. So if you become angry, Dan, or if you become frustrated, here's a thing that I suggest that a way to think about the conversation is, instead of thinking about what people believe, you can ask them why they believe it. It's a simple shift in the way you think. Like,
yeah, I did that for the entire 2020 presidential campaign. I asked people to tell me why you're voting for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris without using the words Donald or Trump. Go. And not one person answered that question. I feel like I answered or asked a pretty diverse group of folks about it.
So let me ask you then, was it, did you become upset with them?
Oh, no, I don't care about that shit. And I don't care if people have a problem with what I say ever, obviously. I mean, I feel like I probably give that off. And Ross certainly doesn't give a shit either. But a lot of people do. And it's not just like we have the benefit, I guess, of being independent media. So we can do whatever the hell we want. But a lot of people, I mean, if you show up with a certain kind of attitude about politics or about woke culture or whatever it is at your office place when you work at a 9 to 5, that might be a problem for you. And there's not a whole lot you can do about it because those aren't protected classes of belief. They could fire you for whatever the fuck they want. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's different between, if somebody fires you, you could have legal recourse. So that's different. But I'm talking about like what you said. If people aren't willing to take a stand against something that's clearly ridiculous, a man and a woman sport, and then they go on to deny biology on top of the whole thing. What does it say about you and your integrity if you're not willing to speak up to that, right? So don't be a coward. Speak up. You know.
Couldn't agree more.
So not only do we have a crisis of legitimacy and a crisis of confidence in our institutions, but we're almost in an age of moral cowardice. And so we have to promote the virtue of when someone says, I don't know, we have to say, hey, thanks. That's a great answer. You know, when somebody's...
I'm sorry. Isn't there some quote about all the evil needs to succeed is for good men to do nothing?
Correct.
That's probably been around for a while.
Correct.
But the Socratic Method's been around for 2,500 years, and we threw that shit out the window somehow.
Yeah, and I would suggest that there's one more value that you need. And if you have this value, you're bulletproof. You're good to go. And that's the value of being sincerely willing to change your mind. If you're sincerely willing to change your mind and then you speak up, you're bulletproof.
Yeah.
You know, Socrates says that a lesser man can never harm a greater man.
I'm willing to change for sure. You know, with me, like, look, I look back at it, even though, like, you know, at the top I said, yeah, I identify as conservative. I'm also willing to look at who was good and who was bad, presidentially and all that other shit. Because a lot of people ask me why I voted for Trump. I voted for Trump, me personally, because he was not a politician. I wanted to see a businessman get in there and see what would happen. I also wanted to see what happened to a normal person who was a reality show star, get in there, and could they succeed for 4 years? And is that job really that big? Or could you just get through it for 4 years and then the world would kind of be fine? And to me, I found my answer. But I'm also willing to look back at history and say, all right, great. Bush wasn't that fucking great. He was a conservative president, and I voted for him. He wasn't that fucking great. I didn't really like Obama that much. I didn't have much problems when Bill Clinton was in office. But financially and fiscally, everything was going well.
So you know? I'm curious, Russ. Do you have friends across the political spectrum, or are most of your friends conservative?
No. I'd say it is actually 50-50. Simply because I spent so much time in LA. I spent about 18 years there. And then I look at college friends. You can always judge a man by who he surrounds his friends, or you know, who he surrounds himself with, friends wise. And friends wise, it's pretty tight knit for me. It's under 15 total friends in this world, where it's just like, all right, great. And I would say
that's an accomplishment.
Well, it's also on purpose as well, where you know, just time wise, I just don't have that kind of time to be.
Can I just drill down on that for a second?
Go ahead.
When you say someone is your friend, you have a level of trust and honesty with them, and you can share things with them that you think may offend them or that they may be mortified by. Do all 15 of those people fall in that category?
Yes. And so like with them, you know, I'm on this thread from like college, for example. There's about 8 of us. They sent me happy birthday, you know, text messages on my birthday, and I blasted them with a dick pic. Okay. Now that was me saying, hey, dude, you can take your happy birthday and wish it to my dick. Things like that, where it's just like, great. Nobody's going to get offended by that. I don't really care. But also half of them are liberal and half of them are conservative in that group. The only time there's been a source of contention over 20 years was when somebody was running for office.
So I would say that your life is better and richer and you have a more fulfilling existence because you have the kind of relationships with people that you can be completely honest with, and they can be completely honest with you. And the problem is, if people don't have that in their lives, they simply do not understand how much better their lives will be.
Yeah, it's definitely true. A meritocracy is a machine that only functions properly if all of the data is added to it, right? If you remove any piece of the data, then it's fucked, because you have no, if you say, well, women, if you add something, for example, like women should be allowed to do this, or transgender women should be allowed to compete against biological women in the Olympics, for example. If you come up with a moral statute like that has no fundamental reason to it, but if you add a bad piece of data, or you take a piece of data away, like biology, for example, then the entire machine breaks down. It breaks down immediately.
So people often ask me, well, why do you care what people? Why do you give a shit so much? If I'm an atheist, if someone believes what's true, and my answer to that is that if the starting condition that you have is false, and you're trying to live a good life, and you're trying to bring about your own flourishing and the people you love in your community, but your starting value is false, then you're going to create conditions outside yourself that will not bring about your flourishing, unless you get lucky, but almost invariably will not bring about your flourishing. So it's really important that we create communities. Tim Urban calls this the idea lab, that we create these spaces and these people in our interpersonal relationships where we can be honest, we can speak openly, and we can, and it's okay if and not only is it okay, you want people to disagree with you. The problem is that we can't do this in the universities now. So it's even more important, like your podcast is even more important. It's even more important, I would argue, for you guys, you get on guests with whom you disagree and you have those hard talks, and then you show people that it's okay to be able to disagree, right? And so, because if they don't get that from you, they're not getting that from anywhere else. And then the society is digging itself into a bigger shithole.
Yeah, and one of our listeners, Reed White, who's always in the chats here on YouTube, was saying Biden has gotten this far. By the way, Reed, I agree with you on that. I mean, shit, if Biden's able to get through these 4 years, just make it, just live, and the country is still fine. Between him and Trump, it really shows that office really isn't as important as we thought it was, in my opinion, where it's just all right, great.
Or it shows that there's a kind of resilience to American democracy and American institutions. But my fear, Ross, I don't want to invade the podcast with gloom and doom, but I'm not even concerned. I'm worried about our institutions. I'm worried what the new the damage that this deranged ideology is doing to them. I'm fairly confident that we are at kind of the end of history, but I'm in terms of the political systems that we have are the ones that we've developed everything that we can develop. I am concerned about the damage that it's doing to the democracy. Not any particular leader, but the ideology. It's like wokeism is a universal solvent. It just corrodes and destroys everything it touches. And I'm not even concerned. I'm worried at this point.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. I think that whenever in human history, when one side or the other has tried, instead of to prove their point, to shut the other side up, that side has always been wrong. Always. There's not one exception in human history for that. And that's why America has worked so well under such, I mean, look, we're a relatively young country, but we've been through a lot in those years and come out on the other side pretty well in most of them. This one, I agree with you, because it's attacking the institutions that make our country strong, right? So I think that individual liberty and entrepreneurship are the ultimate vaccine, I guess we want to call it that, to tyrannical bullshit, right? The more power is located at the lowest possible level, the less chance that anybody's going to be able to, usurp power. Take
So get back into Ross' question. What we can do. One of the things that's so important is that when you meet someone who has a different belief than you do, you just have to listen and try not to create adversarial relationships. And we know, for example, if you look at the literature on cult exiting, why people get out of cults, or if we look at the literature on why people become indoctrinated in a particular religion, a lot of those is that the social milieu, it's the friendships you have, it's the relationships you have. If you look at like why people used to, the old data from why they used to accept homosexuality, it's if they knew someone who's a homosexual, right? And so one of the things that's so important for all of us is to treat with a little extra kindness and a little more listening people who have different views than we do. Like that's one way collectively we can dig ourselves out of this shithole.
Right. And that's the principle of charity, right? First century Jewish guy wrote about this. And the idea is that you give the best possible and most generous interpretation to what someone's just said. And if you have questions, ask them. You don't automatically assume the worst of everything. So you said this, you must be racist. Like, whoa, that's a pretty big leap in logic there, bro. Right. We've not even had a conversation at this point. I made one statement, and based on that one statement, you gave me a label.
Let's even run with that. But let's say that someone is racist. The same principle still applies.
Right.
In fact, I would argue the more odious the belief, the more the principle applies. That you have to listen and treat them with respect and engage how they came to know what they think they know.
Right. Good idea or bad ideas never get resolved in a vacuum. They get resolved by good ideas. You know what I mean? Yeah, that's just how it is.
I said a few years ago, and no one has met the thought challenge or the challenge. Give me a single example of someone who's ever been punched in the head and revised their belief as a result. That was when the whole punching Nazis thing was
right.
Because every time you create an adversarial relationship, people become entrenched in their beliefs. But if you want to loosen people, if you want to lubricate that system, then you show them that you're not the monster that they think you are.
Right. I agree with you that the showing up part, the having the tough conversations, the principle of charity are all important. But what our listeners can't do is take their receipt from watching Drinkin Bros a day and go put it on their job resume, right? These universities still have immense power. And I don't know how we take that power back from them. I feel like that needs to happen.
Let's talk about that. This is another hard pill to swallow that everybody loves their alma mater. Go Ducks, go whatever the fuck it is. You have to stop giving money to your university. Alumni have to stop. You just have to stop. Nobody wants to hear that. They love their sports team. But I'm telling you in no uncertain terms, the university you intended 5 years ago, only 5 years ago, is not the same university today. So you have to stop giving your money to I have 3 dogs that are adopted from a shelter here in Portland. Give to the Humane Society. There are a lot of great things that you could do. The other thing you could do, if you want to talk about it, is if you were a donor to your university, we need to start teaching people how to reach out to the donors of the major donors of the university, particularly people who have just graduated, and email people and ask for Zoom meetings and ask to meet, really go the extra mile. If you're Drinkin Bros and you want to do something about this problem, here's what you can do. Find the major donors to your alumni, to the university. If you just graduated, call them, email them, contact them, set up a meeting and say, I think you need to know what's going on in the university right now. That's going to move the needle.
Let me ask you this. Do you have children?
I do. I have 2 children.
Yeah, same. Has your way of thinking changed? Are you passing this along to your children?
What do you mean?
For me personally, my way of thinking and like talking about your wokeness and everything else that's going on has completely changed from what it used to be. I used to think you grew up, you work hard, you can have a conversation with people. You might have disagreements or arguments. It's not going to cost you your job or your livelihood or something else. I don't think that's possible anymore. And I don't think we're going back to anything. Therefore, like me personally, like, dude, I have changed my way of thinking. I've changed my plan in life. I've got a 15-year plan where it's get as rich as I possibly can to get out of this shit to where I might be canceled, my company might be canceled, my books or films might be canceled, and then teach my kids something else different to go into rather than this bullshit, because I don't think this is going to end. I really don't. I don't think there's enough people that have.
I can guarantee you it's going to end. But let's go back to what you said first. Well, go ahead, finish. I interrupted.
But how? How is it going to end? Because you asking everybody to change their way of thinking, or here's what you need to do, isn't going to probably.
Listen. I'm just gonna, again, on the theme that we've developed to have a relationship. I wish we were together, then we could have drinks after this.
Oh, same.
We could really be the drink bro. Yeah. So I'm gonna push back on that. I don't think it's impossible, but I will say that I think it's very, very difficult. Right? You have to walk on eggshells. Everybody's terrified of something. But let me tell you why I'm absolutely convinced that the belief that this is not going to end is false. Every culture, we have a kind of cultural myopia. So we think that the moral value in our culture is like permanent. And we have a bunch of people who think that whatever moral value they've latched onto is a timeless, eternal eternal truth. Like in Homer, they thought it was strength. In Aristotle, they thought it was the time of the Athenian gentleman, be gentleman. In Voltaire, they thought it was humor. And now we're in a post-Christian society where we're emerging from this. But I'm going to tell you why. It's going to take me a minute to explain, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
That wokeism is simply, first, it's not sustainable. It's too stupid, it's too insane, and it's demonstrably false. So if you said to me, hey, Boghossian, dude, you can't prove that Jesus Christ didn't walk on water, you would be correct. Not only can I not prove that Jesus Christ didn't walk on water, I can't even prove there was an historical Jesus. But I can certainly prove to you that there are biological differences between men and women. Like I can... mountains of data to show that. Now, this ideology, the people caught in its orbit have to do either increasing levels of mental gymnastics to justify it to themselves, or once they have achieved ideological capture, they have to put in things like blasphemy laws or political correctness or speech codes. My university, Portland State University, basically has passed resolutions saying criticism of certain ideas, of the ideas that I have been criticizing, is harassment, right? So it's not engineering, it's critical race theory. Like if you criticize this shit, you're harassing them. Okay, once they've done that, they've lost, because they can't. You wouldn't need to say it's harassment, you just present the evidence, right? If you criticize a guy who's a civil engineer who thinks a certain bridge design is going to work, you criticize that idea, he's not going to say, well, you're harassing me. He's going to say, oh, show me the idea doesn't work, prove the idea doesn't work. But we don't have that. So this idea is inherently unsustainable. It will fall. Now, what I don't know is when it will fall and the damage it will do to our institutions. But I'm telling you, there is no possible way that this madness can sustain itself. It's literally impossible.
Yeah, my concern, I suppose, is that it's going to become so interwoven with the institutions required to keep our country moving forward, like business and education, that the business and education parts might at least temporarily fail when this vacuum happens, because it's going to come, right?
Right. So that's part of the problem. Usually capitalism is a corrective to this, but that's when you know that you're in something, an ideological movement that's so fervent that people are actually less concerned about making money and more concerned about propagating the ideology. That's when you know that there is ideological entrenchment and you have a serious fucking problem.
So maybe we're just waiting for hard times, right? Soft times breed soft men create hard times create hard men, and so on. Maybe we're just waiting for the hard times now. I just wonder, in today's world, what is that going to be? I mean, it's got
to be a war, Dan. You've been in war.
I think famine is more likely. I don't think war will do it. War just engages two social cultures against one another.
No. That's going to just deepen the ideology to make sure that it's proponents. Look, this is what you need to do.
I think famine is probably going to be it. Go ahead.
This is what we need to do. So you can take one approach, and it's called lawfare. You could just sue people who have these deranged woke beliefs. You can do another one like the SPLC, Southern Poverty Law Center, name and shame. But the problem with that is that the people on juries, for example, are going to be woke, or the judge, or the people that if you try to pass ballot initiatives, you're passing them with people who actually want to defund the police or abolish the police even. The way to combat this problem, I was just at a conference in Bozeman sponsored by the Manhattan Institute with Chris Rufo and James Lindsay and a bunch of other folks. And I said that you're never going to solve this problem by an op-ed. Like I'm not going to write another op-ed for the New York Times or the Wall Street. It's just a total waste of time. You have to change the moral mind. You have to change the way people think about these issues. You have to move away from this obsession with personal identity that's killing us. It's dividing all of us, thinking incessantly in terms of race and teaching people to spot grievances. Like you have to change the way that people approach this. Look, my dad was a civil engineer, and he used to tell me, we had a conversation about when we were hiking about how do you take pollution out of a stream? The best way to take pollution out of a stream is to not pollute it anymore, right? We know the cultural pollution. We know it's coming from the universities. We know exactly what they're teaching. This, not only is it not a mystery, they're screaming it from the rooftops. They want everybody to know. So it's the opposite of the secret. We have to start being serious about funding. We have to start, so there's a financial component of this. We have to have an honest conversation about looking at things discreetly in terms of what moves the needle. And in terms of that, we have to change moral attitudes about identity politics, wokeness, what diversity means. And I can break that down further if you'd like.
Well, look, I think everything you're talking about, like just trying to think about it out loud here, what that would take, it would almost take a global collapse financially or...
No, that's the wrong way to think about it. Because if you had a famine or a war, look, let me give you a quick example. I have a friend who has a new car. And
what kind of car is
it? I think it's a Camry.
Is he really a friend then, or is he in Fast and Furious? I'm totally kidding.
No, let me don't derail me because I'm going to lose my train of thought. But on this car, it says something like you have something on the mirror of the car. It says something like it tells you if an object is approaching from behind. Mm-hmm. Anyway, my friend's son was driving this car, and the kid hated going in reverse. He didn't want to go in reverse, and his dad said, you have to learn to drive in reverse. The kid said, I hate it. So he made him, when they would drive every night, he made him go to a place down the street and practice reversing. Well, the kid backed into a pole, and then the little thing on the mirror stopped working because I don't know why it stopped working. And the kid's response to that was, look, I told you I didn't want to go in reverse. This is what happens to go in reverse. Now we're screwed. And the father said, this is why you need to learn to reverse even better. But the point of the story is people will look to their landscape, their data landscape, their epistemological landscape, and they'll find things that justify what they already believe. So if there's a war or a famine or whatever, all the woke people are going to do is going to say, look, this is what happens when not everybody shares our beliefs. Like, you've driven the society into war. This was inevitable, late capitalism or what have you. So none of those... my opinion is that that's the wrong way to look at it.
It might be. I mean, your confirmation biases and cognitive dissonance, that's what's come to define Western civilization now, right? I mean, we have our beliefs and we roll the dice and we're like, oh, 7 sounds right for my beliefs. Let's do this. You know what I mean? There's no actual academic rigor or test of any of our beliefs anymore. People just believe shit. I mean, look, it's not just the woke left either. People believe stupid shit all the time without any reason, and oftentimes to their own detriment. It doesn't make any sense to me. But
yeah,
QAnon.
Go ahead.
QAnon. I like that's one on the right side where it's just like, Jesus Christ, what the fuck are we doing here? But yeah, man, I just, again, all of us can sit here and talk until we're blue in the face and have podcasts and all this other stuff. But until change actually happens, I don't know how to get there.
Right. So let's talk about some things that people could do individually. When someone says, I don't know, if you're asking them a question in your conversation, you can thank them. Hey, thanks, man. Thanks for not bullshitting me. Thanks for not pretending to know things you don't know. Thanks. I appreciate that. That's the first thing. The second thing that somebody can do on an individual level is they can be willing to listen more and be a little gentler with people who have different beliefs, right? So they can kind of make the extra effort to do that. The third thing that people can do, this is on an interpersonal level, is that you can, this is in my book with James Lindsay, How to Have Impossible Conversations, is that you can let people be wrong. Who gives a shit if you don't have perfect congruence of everything you believe and someone else believes? Who gives a shit about that? I mean, when my parents were dying, I had the privilege, my parents saw me into this world and I saw them out of it. I got to hold my parents' hands on their deathbeds. And if you ever know someone's dying, I think that's one of the most amazing things you can ever do for yourself and for someone else is to just hold their hand when they're dying. When you're dying, do you really give a shit who the fuck someone voted for? Probably not, right? So we need to let friends be wrong. And you need to, even more than let friends be wrong, I mean, obviously, look, there are deal breakers. If someone says that they want to kind of start a genocide, okay, that's a deal breaker. Everybody has their own deal breaker. But if someone has a different belief than you do, that's okay. In fact, that's probably good because it will sharpen you in the long run.
Yeah, if I was holding somebody's hand, though, and they were dying, and I asked who they voted for, and they said Biden, and I said mail-in, and they said they got it in after the due date, yeah, dude, I would be pissed at them for all of eternity or whatever exists beyond this world. So, Yeah, I mean, there is one or two instances, but me personally, again, just going through like life on a day-to-day basis with kids. I've got 2 kids as well. I just think the wokeness and everything that's going on during this period, and then that generation having kids, and then raising their kids along with the same beliefs as what's going on now, I think is going to fuck up a whole generation of kids.
It already has.
Yes, and until there is something hard, I guess, like Dan was saying earlier, to change this cycle, I don't know. It'll just continue on because we're not having the tough conversations about what's going on now.
Yeah, we're not, and you know, we're not having those conversations. Sorry, Dan, go ahead.
No, I got mine loaded up. Go ahead.
No, you go.
Okay. Why didn't it happen in the 60s and 70s? Why were they able to turn it around? Why did the boomer generation happen? Why they were tooling around with acid and mushrooms, which I do on a regular basis as well. But they were tooling around with kind of just contrarianism in general, maybe, if you want to call it that. I think maybe it's something that's been common in new generations throughout history, but it was particularly peaked in that era. But by the 80s, most of those people had turned around and gone back into business, right? They got back to work. Maybe it was the Cold War and the threat of not existing anymore. Maybe they were just too fucking busy. Maybe there wasn't any social media. Who knows why it is? But I always wonder why it was this generation and not their generation that completely went tits up. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, frankly.
Mm.
I have a theory on it, and this is me personally. Like 60s and 70s, for example, you would actually go out and live your life, go out and into the world and do something, no matter what that was. Today, you can just be glued in front of a screen. The government's going to give you money. You can just sit there and fucking stare at this all day or this all day. And you don't really have to do all that much. You can work from home. You can do everything from home. You don't have to socialize. You don't have to go out and think for yourself. You don't have to do a lot of things. And as the years tick by, that's going to become more prevalent where, you know, AI and robots and all that other shit are going to take away more and more jobs. More and more people are going to be at home. They're not going to go out and socialize. Therefore, they're not going to have different conversations just simply because they don't have to. You can stay and look at somebody else's conversations on a phone, not really interject. And what I mean by really is you can write a comment on something. Nobody knows who you are because you're a fucking avatar or something else in this world. Therefore, I don't know how you change it or how it breaks, or you don't really have to go out in the world and fight for a job anymore. You could just send in a resume through online, do a fucking Zoom interview, present yourself from here up, probably get the job, make a decent salary, the same as our parents were back in the 60s and 70s, and nobody really knows anything about you. But underneath, you could be stepping on a fucking dead rabbit if you wanted to, jacking off. And unless you get tubins live on air or something like that, you don't really know what's going on because you're just seeing people from here up or some kind of avatar, and that's it.
I feel so bad for that guy, man.
Tubin?
Yeah, I wish we wouldn't even talk about him. I just feel terrible. I feel just terrible for him.
You can't have a jerk sesh mid-afternoon when you're on a Zoom with 16 colleagues from the New Yorker. Now, if you were working for Mad Magazine, maybe, and that would be a fun thing where somebody could sketch, you know, Max Headroom next to your dong or something. But I mean, dude, there's no way out of what he did. The beautiful thing was
that's going to follow him. I think we need to leave him alone, man. I think he's been humiliated and tormented. Unless that's his
I don't understand.
You know, that could be
I don't understand why he got fired. Why did he get fired?
He didn't get fired. He's back on air.
No,
he's back on air.
He did get fired for a while. Well, he was suspended. Whatever. Why did he get suspended? Because he forgot his camera was on? Like an error like that is you get suspended for? That seems kind of dumb to me. Maybe to be honest, they probably just wanted him not on TV for a while so people would forget. But then his first TV appearance back, he recounted the entire thing. That didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So I agree with you that, you know, there's no point in beating a dead horse here. But he did kind of bring some of it on himself by coming back in his first interview was to discuss. And the way they went about it was horrible.
Well, they didn't have a choice. Terrible. Yeah. And Homegirl had to ask him.
Just ignore it. Be an adult and ignore it. How many times in your life have you watched somebody fucking almost trip in public and you just divert your eyes, don't say anything?
Look,
why do you need to say something?
I agree. But this is the exact conversation we've been having for over the last hour is That's the culture we live in. That's the society we live in. You've got to explain yourself if you want to come back and get your job.
And that's the other problem that I find about this. And I published a piece with James Lindsay about this. Privilege is the original sin. So this new ideology has no redemption narrative. So nobody can ever be redeemed from this. I was talking to a friend at this conference, Walter Kern's wife is an amazing woman. Walter Kern's an amazing guy. Be a good guest for your show. And she was telling me a story that I had read about a guy who was in some kind of alternative medicine company or whatever, but he was in the bath and he had some fibromyalgia or some illness or whatever it is. And he got up and they saw his penis and on Zoom, and he said, "Oh, I'm sorry. And of course, the moment that you say you're sorry, the instant that you admit any kind of mistake, that's when the swarm comes. You should never admit. You never.
Yeah,
say
it's like your toddler when they fall down. If you don't react to it, they'll just go on about their business, which goes a long way in describing the emotional maturity of people who think this way. You know what I mean? It's just stupid.
Yeah. And I was going to make the contrast because I was reading something and basically a woman's breast was shown. She had some kind of wardrobe malfunction or something. And then everyone was like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. That's terrible that happened to you. It's terrible." But when it happens to the guy, it's the end of the world. Everybody's, ganging up on him. And so I do think that not only is there a double standard, but can I just say something else that's on my mind real quick that I've been thinking about?
Go ahead. That dicks don't photograph well?
No. But it's related. I've noticed when I've watched TV and movies lately, and I just finished the 2019 series War of the Worlds, which is on Amazon. Anytime that there's any kind of sexual, not aggression, but any kind of sex scene, it's always the women leading the scene, like 100% of the time. It's these guys are these inert, they're not beta males, they're alpha male-ish, who don't come on to women, or they're just standing there and all the way. So it's a really interesting kind of cultural shift to watch that manifest.
Yeah, and all of that is going to change the way we think and look at sex and everything else, and it's coming from Hollywood. And now there's on-set sexual coaches who tell you if you've gone too far and everything else. And again, it's a never-ending cycle of bullshit. I love that you have hope in this world.
Like, that's another layer of bullshit. How does one qualify to know what's... So the whole thing is arbitrary, and we're trying to impose these value systems that we have. And that's the thing, like I watch it. I'm a sci-fi fanatic, and they're always trying to make predictions and to kind of give glimpses, and they're always wrong. But they're not merely wrong. They're wrong they're so far off. Like, there's an overemphasis on technology and an underemphasis on social roles and gender. And the last season of Voyager was an absolute abortion when it comes to that. Yeah, Discovery. I'm sorry. Yeah.
When in human history has culture not become more complicated? I mean, unless we start to resegregate one another and go back into, what do you call it? Homogenous societies. We're going to continue to have, and I don't just mean homogenous racially. I mean homogenous thought-wise as well.
Right.
It's going to get more complicated. Of course it will. Like, you see, like if you watch Star Trek and shit like that, or whatever, Battlestar Galactica, I guess to a lesser degree, but some of these shows where everybody's bisexual, everybody's multiracial, aliens are fucking people, blah blah blah. It's never even addressed that might be your problem. Not that it's intrinsically a problem, but I mean the problems that arise from putting different people and different different types of thought together. It always causes conflict. We have to be ready for the conflict. That thing that they say in Calling the American Mind: prepare your kids for the road, don't prepare the road for your kids. I think it's one of the most important things I've ever read, to be honest.
So that's why, as Haidt said, the second author of The Coddling of American Mind, morality binds and blinds. By the way, Torchwood was the only show I've ever seen in which every single person on the show was bisexual. And to speak to one more thing that you said, I think that the value that we should be talking about now, that we should all want, is cognitive liberty. That's the value that we need to promote. We need to, it's just like what Ross said, like he wants a university, the same university I want. And I don't think this makes either one. I do not think that this is a conservative value, to be clear. I want my kids and our generation to be taught by people who actually believe a wide variety of stuff. And I want them to be able to defend their ideas. That's what I want. but that's far too much to ask for right now. So I think that the value that we should be espousing and talking about is cognitive liberty. So let me give you an example. So recently in Canada, there were a bunch of Catholic churches that were burned down. Now, let me be clear about a few things. This is a moral abomination. There's zero tolerance, and whoever did that should be punished to the full extent of the law. And I'm saying that as an atheist. I'm a pretty hardcore atheist. We have to give people the opportunity to live the lives and have freedom of belief. But the woke don't want that. The woke want exactly the opposite. They want the lack of cognitive liberty. They want you to believe exactly what they do, particularly about systemic oppression and racism and sexism, et cetera. And the value, again, the value that you need to think about is cognitive liberty. So it doesn't matter if a friend of yours or someone who has a different belief, what you want to look for is someone who allows you to believe what you believe and have honest engagements with that person.
Look, we could talk about this for hours, Peter. Your book is great. It is crushing the charts. Now's the point in the show we get to the Drinkin' Bro of the Week, which is someone who has inspired you or helped you become the person you are today. Who would you like to give the Drinkin' Bro of the Week to?
Living or dead?
Either one.
I think my dad, my father. My father was a straight shooter. He was always honest with me. And at the time I hated it, but now I am deeply saddened that I don't have that from him anymore. He would always criticize me, sometimes personally, but he always did it with love and for the idea that he wanted me to be a better person. And I didn't realize how much I had learned from that, especially when I pushed back and sometimes he yielded. And I'm incredibly grateful that I've had someone in my life who's been honest with me and willing to risk our relationship to tell me what he thinks is in my best interest. And because of that, I think I'm a better person today. Awesome.
Peter, the book is out now. Tell everybody where they can find you and it. Obviously, 92% of sales come from Amazon. Do you read your own audiobook?
I do. I read my own audiobook. It's How to Have Impossible Conversations. And it's just that. It's a step-by-step guide for how to have impossible conversations. And you can find me on Twitter at Peter Boghossian, Boghossian. And I have a ton of projects coming out that are almost all around dismantling woke ideology and exposing it for the moral corrosion that it is.
Look, we're looking forward to it, and please come down to Austin. It would be great to have a guy like you in studio, actually.
I'm going to Austin, dude. This month, I'm going to Austin.
When?
I have 3 events at the end of the month. I'm going to give a talk. I'm going to meet a guy who's starting a new university in Austin. He should be definitely someone you should know and interview. Maybe you could have him on your podcast.
Dude, come in the studio.
Yeah, let's go out for drinks afterward.
Yes, for sure.
Awesome.
Yeah, that'd be great. Hit us up when you're in town, and then let's get you back in here. It'd be great to be off Zoom and actually touch and shake the other person's hand.
Email me, and I'll give you my phone number, and let's hang out, man. Let's do it. Yeah.
Awesome. Let's do it. D'Anthony, we appreciate it. I'll see you in Vegas soon, my man. For Dan Hollaway, I'm Ross Patterson. We are the Drinkin' Bros. Good night, everyone.